Now, okay, good morning. Well, I'm looking forward to a conversation with Harry Kutty, who's sitting there with me in this meeting. Harry is chair of the Aspire Cooperative Trust down in Southampton, which we tend to call Cooperative City. Got 27 schools, I think, in cooperatives down there now, and a very important partnership with Southampton University and so on and so on. So we're going to have a talk about a little bit about life and career and things like that, and then particularly some very interesting work that's been going on between our cooperative group of schools and the trust, looking at how to manage the ever-present COVID pandemic, and looking forward to talking about that. Harry, thanks for your time. Good to be with you. So I think firstly I'd better explain my backdrop, which has got guitars, and just to share with you, where did my career...
Great backdrop, John. I like it personally.
Well, it shows I want to be a musician. But the interesting thing is, I mean, just briefly, that my career started in Tottenham, North London, an estate called Broadwater Farm, which went through some really significant disturbances and difficulties as a community. And I was around during some of that time. And having got my probationary first year's teaching job, I slightly worried the head teacher when I wheeled a piano into the playground and played to the entire block of flats opposite, "I'd like to teach the world to sing." He knew at that point that he was dealing with something a little bit worrying. And then 2 weeks later, not only didn't tell me off, but asked if I'd like to lead for music in the school. And with 3 chords, the 3-chord trick man. That's how, anyway, that's the beginning of my career. So, and look where it's gone from there. How about you? Where did you start off, Harry? Where's your beginnings in teaching?
So, yeah, I mean, I've lived pretty much everywhere in the country, John. So my parents moved around a lot. My parents both went into education later on in life, actually, so moved around depending upon the schools that they were working in. So I actually trained at Huddersfield University. My first training schools in PGC year were in Halifax and in Queensbury and Bradford. And then as you do when you're applying for a job, and having not had roots per se in any one area, it was literally a pin in the map job. And the first job I went for was a school called Meadway Comprehensive in Reading, and I was very fortunate to be invited for interview and got the job, and that was the start of my career.
Reading's quite an interesting place, isn't it? There's Thames Valley, little bit of a mini Silicon Valley for the UK down the road in Swindon, I think it is, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when I went there, it was beginning to be on the up. So the Oracle, which is the huge shopping centre, retail centre, had just been created, and things were definitely moving in the right direction. So early 2000s, so 2000, I was there. It was quite a buoyant time for the town.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge football fan, but there was, is it the Majewski Stadium down there that, you know, built Reading's profile as a team? So community that's gradually been finding itself in different ways. And yeah, it's the epitome for me of a town which has all sorts of characteristics. I mean, my daughter's a journalist looking at music. So every year she's sort of, normally she's missing this year, of course, the Reading and the Reading Leeds festivals, but yeah, so how did you come to Southampton? What brought you to Southampton?
So I met my wife, Colette, teaching at Meadway, and she's originally from Southampton. And so, yeah, she persuaded me to kind of move down here, although she did tell me that I didn't know the area at all. And I was still working in Reading at the time, whereas she was working in Southampton. So she told me that we'll move to somewhere like Bishopstoke in Eastleigh, because that's nearly halfway, and of course that's nowhere near halfway. It's far closer to Southampton. So I was sold a dud, but it worked. And for near enough 7 years, I commuted from Southampton to Reading until I moved actually to Cantell in 2008.
Fantastic. So coming up to, you know, where you're at now, I mean, I've been down to Southampton several times. I helped in developing the original Regent's Park Trust, which is now the Southampton Trust. Worked very closely with a good friend who was a head teacher down there. And it seems to me that, you know, the schools are getting it together, and there is a real strength to some of the cooperation. So tell us a little bit about Aspire and some of the work that's been going on generally to try and benefit from mutual experience, you know, sort of the sharing of practice and actually, I guess at the moment, the sharing of challenge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we set up the Aspire Community Trust in 2017 on the basis that actually we didn't want to be islands of schools, and we were all very clear that we didn't want to move into create our own multi-academy trust or be part of a multi-academy trust, but we saw the benefits of that kind of a model. And with any model, of course, John, as you know, there are benefits and disadvantages, and what we wanted to do was optimize the benefits and the advantages. So we took through memorandums of understanding the very best from multi-academy trusts. And what I mean by that is the model of support, challenge, and ultimately holding each other to account. What we didn't want to do was create what was essentially another soft sort of federation, a further enhancement of, let's say, our cluster, and for it not to have the challenge and the accountability as well. So that's what we did. And since then, we've grown to being 9 schools, primaries, a mixture of secondary, so 1 secondary, primaries, junior, and a special school as well. And it's very clear that we are able to learn from each other. And most significantly, actually, in terms of pedagogy, us as the secondary, learning a great deal about the very basics of teaching from our primary colleagues. And what that's enabled us to do really is strengthen what was already quite a strong Key Stage 2 into 3 transition, but making sure that we build academically on the learning from junior and primary.
I tell you what, I mean, it you know, as they say, warms the cockles of my heart. I started in primary, and I think I've worked across most sectors over the years, and I think what has always been bizarre, I think present times may be seeing a change actually, but the bizarre sort of, I don't know, you know, one phase is more important than another phase. And my judgment on success for the children we worked with in a primary school, we used to exercise a 5-year later, take a rain check. What are they doing now? How are they doing as they get, you know, towards GCSEs? And by gauging the range of development and personal success and achievement for children we'd worked with, we calibrated and decided how good a job we were doing. And that conversation then, as you say, you know, you start to get clinical, but in a very warm way, because that's the focus. It's the student, the child's progress that matters, not the egos, and not the, you know, one phase is superior or one individual.
You know, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we do. We measure ourselves on what the students are doing after they leave us. GCSEs are a very narrow measure, as is progress. These are all, you know, key performance indicators. That's fine. You know, there's a job to be done around that. But essentially, are our youngsters leading a happy and successful life once they leave us? If they do that, then we can walk away saying that we've done our job.
We will talk about that more another time, I think, because there's something very rich in there. As you probably know, we're building up a program or dimension to our work as a network nationally, which we've called Good with Schools, inevitably, you know, Cooperative's Good with Schools. But the serious bit underneath that is to identify case studies and very precise work that is looking at how school performance on a range of measures, not only, yeah, the conventional data indicators, but also what you've just said, how they're doing in life, you know, the quality of life and the fulfillment of aspiration. I think those are important things.
Well, so I think just before we move on, I think, you know, schools will need to look at this moment in time, this last year and a half, and take forward the golden nuggets that have been learned by many institutions up and down the country. But also it is incumbent on the government, the Department for Education and others to really pause and to look at some of the things that perhaps in the daily grind of things they wouldn't have had to do. And one of those things has to be the assessment framework at 16, and whether it really delivers on what businesses are saying they need in terms of the CBI and what the skill set that they're looking for, because there still appears to be a huge disconnect from when I speak to organizations such as NatWest that I do regularly, when they talk about the skill sets that they're looking for and the type of practice, they're looking at that as the overarching factor rather than GCSEs themselves.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think we would as well. In terms of employment, there are qualifying conditions, obviously, for anybody that we work with. But you look beyond that to say, you know, what are the transferable skills, the aptitudes, and the dispositions? And I think that's, I couldn't agree more. Harry, we're going to go into a third series on this, I can tell. But moving from that, I think, you know, taking your point, this is a learning opportunity. But, you know, we're calling this virtual conference, you know, a collation of different events and discussions. 2020 hindsight, what have we learned? And it, you know, as always, it's slightly tongue-in-cheek, but there's a serious opportunity. And one of the things that will need to be reviewed is the degree to which schools have facilitated themselves or have had support for managing the most extraordinary situation over the last year. We're coming up to a year of COVID and coping with COVID. And what I'd like you to do is give us a flavour of, so what is going on exactly, and how has it worked between the Southampton cluster, and then you've involved, obviously you've worked very closely with the university, and I understand that this is now being considered or actually being rolled out to support a further wave of schools in the region. So just talk us through from a very basic, so what exactly, because the response for all schools has been a series of questions. How do we know the level of the medical and the health concern that we are amidst? Do we know enough about infection and transmission within different ages and sectors and so on? Having then, if you get to a stage of identifying that there is some infection or transmission, it's managing that and the bubbles, multiple bubbles of different descriptors. Where have you got to in trying to translate that into something pragmatic and useful?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. I think every single school leader is now no longer just an expert in school leadership, but also amateur epidemiologists, medical professionals, and so on, because they've had to go out, as I have done, to seek the information because the information hasn't been readily available. And in early August, we had the opportunity, 4 of our Aspire Community Trust, to take part in a trial of saliva testing. For COVID-19. Really very simple, non-invasive, non-intrusive, a test that's carried out at home, simply the case of providing a saliva sample and you get the test results within 12 to 24 hours. The phase 2 was an incredible success. And by that, I mean that it only enhanced the control measures that we had in place in the school. It was enabled us to identify asymptomatic cases early on, to close down and kind of tighten up that bubble, make sure that we were sending home only the absolute students that we needed to send home to self-isolate. We were able to give a great deal of confidence to our communities as to the percentages of students who were being sent home who tested negative, for example. So if your son or daughter was coming home and I'd asked them to self-isolate because they'd been a contact, that information alone might give you quite a bit of anxiety. But actually, if I then said, but of course, remember that your son tested negative yesterday, it just provides a little bit of a context and therefore confidence as well. And,
absolutely.
And yeah, as a result of that, attendance rates across the 4 schools were 94%, where you know that they dropped kind of, about 85%. And nationally.
That's almost a vote of confidence in a way, though. And I think what you've also described very succinctly, but I mean, actually, I think many of our colleagues will recognise you can unpack into massive volumes the delicacy and the importance of communication with families, and the fact that you're also dealing with the Venn diagram or the ripples in and out of national anxiety.
Yeah.
So to find an approach that helps with that is, I mean, that in itself is fairly profound, significant, and valuable.
No, you're right.
Sorry, I'm interrupting you, but
no. I mean, communication has played such an important part of this pandemic, and where it's been lacking elsewhere, and I think we all know where that's been lacking, school leaders have stepped up. And actually, a lot of people in the community are looking to school leaders and other community leaders to gain information on exactly what's going on, what they can do, what they can't do, and so on and so forth. But yes, I mean, it's added a great deal of confidence. It was a huge success. The DHSC have signed off, it's 97% efficacy, so really very high rates. And as a result, I'm now involved as the education advisor to the CEO of the program. We are, and I say this all the time, we are flying by the seat of our pants in order to try and get this out to as many schools at the moment, secondary schools, those with secondary age pupils in special schools and colleges across Hampshire, Portsmouth, Southampton, and the Isle of Wight. So that's working at the moment, and we've already got, we've got, I think, 20 schools at the moment that regularly be testing, and that will increase rapidly as we go through every week.
I think, flying by the seat of your pants, I mean, no better way to travel in my view, but it's a necessity. I mean, I think, the mother of invention, etc., is what comes to mind. What about, I mean, it sounds phenomenal. And I mean, I know we've worked in Hampshire, we've got very good relations with the senior staff there. The relationship with the Isle of Wight is one that's been one of support and outreach over the last 10 years or so. And the Isle of Wight, interestingly, of course, has been a focus through the pandemic on various types of case study research work to try and grapple with this pandemic. There must be surely some interest from, I'm just asking, the Department for Education or other parties to recognise this as of significance or value. Would I be right in assuming that?
Well, we've been working with the Deputy DPO, Data Protection Officer from the DFE now on a weekly basis for many, many weeks, because they see this, the model of what we're doing as kind of best practice and something that can be shared. Interesting enough, the reason why they're working with us is all about the data sharing. So with the lateral flow device testing and any other forms of testing, that's a consent-based model. So one that seeks consent. And right from the start, Professor Keith Godfrey, who's led on this program, and indeed myself, our aspiration was inclusivity, to get as many children doing this test as possible. And what we didn't want is this, this damn consent form, which head teachers know about. God, have they got it in yet? Oh no, we'll need to chase them up. We didn't want that to be a barrier. So we worked with the ICO, we worked with the DFE, and we worked with our own legal team, Stone King, who you'll know very well, and to agree the legal basis for sharing the data on something called public task, which is sharing that data because it is for the benefit of the public. Absolutely. And of course, in this time, absolutely right thing, and parents and students and staff have absolutely agreed that and have benefited greatly from the program.
Absolutely, yeah, no, I think it's, I mean, ironically, one of the things that I've always taken comfort from, I believe it was one of the major retail groups, when first looking at things like GDPR, they took a marvelously common sense approach that said, well, we have literally 300,000-400,000 loyalty club members, and we take the default position that they would wish to be told about the opportunities and benefits, and we make it clear that that is an understanding that can always be changed readily. And I think we found that quite helpful in our own organization to say that is, in many ways, it's a common sense position. You absolutely respect human rights, legal rights, personal rights. But when this is of such significant public interest, I think it's right to say that, there is a sort of position of, if people are engaging, they are with you. And that's actually the essence of cooperation. This has, got so many of the famous values and principles in there, sort of solidarity and equity and equality and all the rest of it. So it's spreading out. It's got greater reach, reach being another cooperative trust in Southampton, of course. And I think that's going to be, in a way, going back to the early bit of this conversation, it's going to be something to learn from. Because one of the issues, to touch on something a little bit more challenging, one of the issues for me, and I'm speaking both in a personal capacity, but also my professional view working with cooperative schools, trust. It's the word that we use to describe collectives or cooperatives of schools. It's not the hierarchical model, as you said earlier. The academy model is a directive system where there is a chief executive and there are arrangements made from, in a sense, a central point outward. But the cooperative model and the cooperative trust is something I found certain quarters find difficult to understand, because it's a discursive, it's an explorative, and it's a consensual arrangement for doing a better job. So I think one of the things, going back to the trust theme, that has been, you can't say it in any better way, it's been a real problem from the DfE outwards. At times there's been too much central direction. My view, not your words, but my view is that there's been such a plethora of, I think, 40 to 50 guidance documents in the first wave, with one local authority, I mentioned it to you a while back, publishing 153 pages of guidance to the guidance. And what we put out at the very beginning was empower our schools nationally, give them the mandate to work within the legal framework, the considerations of health and safety, partnership with the unions, the staff, their learning communities, and they will deal with this with adequate resources, condition number one, professional health support, condition number two. From that point on, the government would have had a role, in my view, which could have been more constructive, of collating experiences such as the one you described. But you may choose not to comment at all. But I mean, I don't know how much you would disagree with what I've said. That's my view.
No, I don't disagree. I mean, the government clearly have been caught between a rock and a hard place, as all of the government have been. And, you know, these have been unprecedented times and challenging times as well. You know, with regards to the guidance, there came a point for me that there was so much guidance that it was just the case as a leader of this school and looking after my role as the chair of the trust, to just say, okay, we've got to cut through this and just do absolutely what's right for our schools and make sure that our control measures are as tight as they can be, make sure that our risk assessments are as tight as they can be, just be very clear that we are doing everything in our power to minimize and mitigate risk. And then, we cannot do any more than that at all. And there were moments, you'll remember, in June when there was a suggestion that we might come back on June the 1st. And actually, as a group of schools, having reviewed the data, the science, the public health information, felt that that wasn't the right thing to do. And even though the government hadn't quite said it, we were decisive to say, we're not going to do it, that we need to wait. And even 10 days, which it was then, June the 10th, would make all the difference, which it did. So I think, the government have to do what they have to do. They can't give nuanced bits of information because the audience is incredibly wide and varied. And I therefore think it's just incumbent on us, as leaders, working collaboratively, which is key. What we need to learn from is that these WhatsApp groups, these organic groups that we've created over this pandemic, the fact that as a group of Southampton head teachers, secondary, we met on a weekly basis, our trust head teachers met, that's what made the difference. It was the coming together of leaders.
I think that's been, again, the reason I say in fairly stark terms, my assessment is that learning from this experience will involve a recalibration of trust. And actually, I use the word quite deliberately of empowering, because directing, I accept absolutely that this is a situation that's unprecedented. A government of any particular political party or hue would struggle. That's absolutely correct. I think that it's been sort of the case that there have been incidents of really poor timing. If you issue a new instruction actually when schools are theoretically not open, or over a weekend for implementation by the first 5 minutes of the next working day, these things are not right. It's as simple as that. So moving on from there, I think the hindsight, the learning from it, we're interested, Co-op schools as a network, in drawing from exciting and positive work, and as you say, the demonstration of leadership. Leadership is all about exercising responsibility and knowing that you're accountable, but it's the responsibility that drives you, not the accountability. And so going forward, I mean, we will make sense of the last year. That's one of the things we were trying to do. And I think this conference that we're having, it looks like, despite all the circumstances, it's going to have some really useful reflection in it. We're really pleased that we've just had confirmation of Kate Green, who's the Shadow Secretary of State, make a contribution. We've got people who've been in education for a long time and got various experiences, and we'll draw it together. And then we will share that, and we will discuss it with the Department for Education, ministers and others. I want to sort of move to a sort of a more light-hearted end in a way, Harry. I spoke with Vic Goddard, who's, you know, sort of an old friend, did the first Fly on the Wall series of Educating Essex. And I knew before, you know, I'm not a football man, as I say, particularly. I like football managers, strangely enough. I'm very interested in management. So as soon as I said, who in the last year would be someone you really admire, knowing that Vic is obsessed with Crystal Palace, you know, he's a huge fan of football, I knew where that was going from. Now, that's somebody fairly obvious out there. I think, you know, Marcus Rashford we came to. So you can't have Marcus Rashford. Okay. But is there anybody else whose presence could be, I mean, it doesn't have to be somebody with a high profile, but it could be a student, it could be anyone. But you know what it's like working with young people, working with schools. I think on a daily basis, you're struck by, that's amazing. And that deserves admiration or respect and support. So I just wondered if you could call to mind somebody, it could be on a global stage, it could be in Cantell, it could be anyone, but is there somebody that you've noted over the last year and thought, you know something, you know, that is to be admired, you know, the way that they've presented themselves and the way they've contributed?
Yeah, so I mean, overall, I would say the senior leadership teams of every single school up and down the country who will have done an incredible job, John, you know, during that first lockdown, that many of them, you know, would have been in total anguish when the schools were closed, not knowing when it would reopen, and then being thrown into having to create this remote learning strategy and so on and so forth. And it's often, we often spend all of our time praising all of the you know, the staff, and that's absolutely right. But sometimes, you know, the SLT who work tirelessly in the background sometimes get left behind. And I would say, I think senior leadership teams across the country have done an incredible job. And more personally from me, it wouldn't be someone right now, but it was someone that is making me think of later, which is Michael Palin. And my favorite book has always been Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days. And I followed that up as a child watching the TV series from Michael Palin. Around the World in 80 Days. And I look forward to, as many of us, a time when we could start to travel again, a time when, you know, because I think that's so important, travel. I think it's so important us going and experiencing each other's culture, finding more things out about their history, about their religion. And sadly, in an era of populism and an era where borders seem to be wanting to be closed, I think it's a real challenge with coronavirus, clearly. But once that's gone, I think it's incumbent on everyone to get out there, get traveling, and get learning, know who your neighbors are. And when I mean neighbors, I'm talking about global neighbors, of course. So I've started to watch Michael Palin's Around the World in 80 Days again for a better time.
Well, I hardly need to ask you. The final sort of topic of discussion was where next. So it's onward, outward, reconnecting. And I think that's probably a lovely place to finish. And if I just invite you, firstly, thank you for your time, Harry. It's great. Always good to talk. Perhaps just a couple of messages if you want to. This has been like Desert Island Discs, or, you know, you've just been on Popmaster.
Yeah.
Would you like to say hello to a few people? So, I mean, I just invite you, if you wanted to put a message out, firstly, perhaps to our family of schools as a Co-op network, and secondly, very importantly, to your own learning community, who I'd like to thank for lending you to us this morning. So any particular thoughts or messages, and we'll close with that.
Well, I mean, I just think to all communities, you know, thank you for all you're doing. I think that's school staff, but also indeed families as well. We're in this together, and this sense of togetherness, which of course binds cooperative trust together, is what's going to see us to the light at the end of the tunnel. And there is, of course, a light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccine and the rapid rollout of the vaccine. We're not there yet. We've got some challenging times, but it's the togetherness, the collaboration, the collectiveness that I've seen over the last year that's going to get us through. So I thank my colleagues more locally in Southampton as part of the trust, and wider as well, but also across the country for for what you're doing. It's so incredibly amazing. And I guess just keep going.
That's lovely. And for your own Cantell family.
Well, I say this every week because I do write to them. And of course, I've done now somewhere in the region of 42 letters, I think, John, since the start of the pandemic. So they're probably getting annoyed with me. But
there's a collection forming there.
Yeah, exactly. But the Cantell community are incredible. One of the proudest moments that we were able to achieve, John, was to create a memory wall. So we're having some work done, memory wall, and it is of all of the artwork that the students did during lockdown. If you go onto our Facebook site, Cantell Facebook site, you'll see that the school is very much alive, and open, even though the buildings aren't open for the wider community. And it's just to say to them, thank you, keep going, you are wonderful, and I love you all.
That's lovely. Harry, we're going to ask you just to ping over a couple of links if you've got those images that we can actually share with people. But thank you again for your time, and stay well, stay safe. Good luck in all you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks for